Hello, it's me, Mike, again with HPDS. I'll be doing a Genesis 11 study this time around, so I'll go ahead and start off with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Please give me this day my daily bread, and forgive me of my debt, as I forgive those in debt to me. And Lord, lead me not into temptation, but instead deliver me from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom of power and glory, Lord, forever and ever. Amen. All right, so let me go ahead and get started with reading through Genesis 11. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old, and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Arphaxad lived 530 years, and begat Selah. And Arphaxad lived after he begat Salah after 403 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Salah lived 30 years, and begat Aber. And Salah lived after he begat Aber 403 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Aber lived 34 years, and begat Peleg. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years, and begot Reu. And Peleg lived after he begat Reu 209 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Reu lived 230 years, and begat Serug. And Reu lived after he begat Serug 207 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Serug lived 30 years, and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Nahor lived 29 years, and begat Terah. And Nahor lived after he begat Terah 119 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Terah lived 70 years, and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, she had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees, to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran, and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. All right. So it looks like that was Genesis 11 in its entirety. So what do we got going on in Genesis 11? Basically, we got a few things going on. We've got one language in the world. So the chapter starts off talking about how there's one language in the world. God goes down, and then there's the confusion of the languages. So God confuses them, and he does it there at the Tower of Babel. This is an infamous story known as the Tower of Babel. And yeah, that's what happened here, is that God confounded the languages. So there was only one language. Now there's as many languages as there now are. Um, the generations of Shem and who's the ancestor of Abram. So basically, we go after the confusion of the languages. We have Shem, and then we go over his generations. And let me see. I got some notes here. Let's see. Verse 1 states the problem. The whole earth was of one language and one speech. Keep in mind, God promised to not contend with men forever, and that they should be limited to 100 years old, 120 years old. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that basically there's a problem, and that problem is everybody is speaking one language, and they might do whatever they come up with, they imagine to do. That's what God says, and God wasn't contending with them any longer. He wasn't going to let them be living these long lives, and we do see that in the generation of Shem. So then we got verses 2 through 9, which is the story of the Tower of Babel. And let's see, it says 2 through 4, as the people were expanding, they make a tower to heaven. Verses 5 to 8, God comes to see the city and tower, decides to confound their languages. Verse 9, the city is named Babel. Verses 10 through 25, basically, whereas 2 through 9 tells the story of Ham's line, because keep in mind that Babel was part of Nimrod. That was Nimrod's kingdom over there, and that was from the line of Ham. But verses 10 through 25 is going to tell the story of Shem's line. And let's see, there's an iteration of births and deaths. The deaths, you'll notice, show that the people started dying younger than ever before after the flood. The Tower of Babel is introducing war. Yeah, so basically it's like a what happened here? I froze. Let me wait till I freeze over here. I'm not unfrozen yet. There it is. I'm unfrozen now. Okay, and I froze up again. There it is. Okay, so and I'm freezing up some more. I hope I don't keep freezing. I'm encoding overloaded. Okay. I think it's going right again. But yeah, so let me go ahead and go through it, and what I'll do is I'll take a look. Let's take a look at our, let me see if I got this. Okay, I got this. So yeah, so let's see what's going on here. The whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And this is another thing that people consider this some sort of a myth. People, for some reason, know that all the humans started off in one spot, but for some reason, the idea of one language is just too much for people. That everybody had one language is absolutely true, absolutely the case. After Noah, obviously the whole world would have been dead, and there would have only been just these few families. So at a certain point, there would have only been just a handful, a couple of 100 people, 100 people, tens and 20s of people, 30 people, 40 people. Now all of a sudden we're 100, 200, 1,000, maybe 10,000. Who knows how many were there at this point? But they were all speaking one language. And it says here, and this is, for me, I find this kind of, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land. So this is saying they journeyed from the east. Other translations I've come across say they journeyed to the east. So this is from the east, and some other people, let me go ahead and take a look. Genesis 11:2. Let's see. Genesis 11:2. And I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this one and take a look at all the different versions we got here. And as people moved eastward, see, as the people migrated to the east, and here they got, and as people migrated from the east, and as people journeyed eastward, it came about as they journeyed east. It came to pass as they journeyed from the east. Here you go, as people migrated from the east. And then here's another one. But after some of them moved from the east, as they wandered about in the east. Here's another one. As they wandered about in the east, as people migrated. So you do see that there's a. This one says as people migrated westward. So there's obviously some contention here about where they were traveling and which way they were traveling. But like we said, if I had gone into Turkey, Turkey map, Turkey map. I don't know why I forgot to put map. We see right over here that they would have been in Ararat, and the mountain of Ararat's way down up in here. And yeah, I can see how this whole thing is, my computer is slowing down for some reason. Turkey was way over here. The Ararat mountain was way over here. So they would have actually been traveling from the east. So they would have been traveling westward. They would have come in and they would have found where is the Tower of Babel, and Babel is all up over here somewhere. It's over here. So, oh, look, they would have, yeah, so see, they would have actually been traveled southeast. So they would have been traveling south and into the east. So it is some good, here's where Babel is, and they would have been somewhere down here, and they would have come from up here, which is that mountain. So they would have actually been traveling. That's why maybe it is east, in the east, as they were traveling in the east, because Israel is ultimately where, Moses would have been writing this from somewhere over here in the Sinai, I think is where he would have been, somewhere outside of Israel, not quite into, because he didn't make it into the promised land. So Moses would have been up in the desert, and he would have been writing about these guys, and that means he would have never really been out there. I mean, Moses he was in Egypt, and from Egypt he came back, and he would have spent his time in his life up in here, not really knowing what's going on over in Babel and what happened in Turkey and Ararat. So these people, when Moses is writing this, he would have been writing about territory that he probably never visited. He was never there. He didn't know exactly. He knew that they were off over here. So that's probably why there's some contention there about which direction were they traveling. Were they traveling eastward? Were they traveling westward? Well, it seems like it might have been as they wandered about in the east. That seems to be probably the best. They might have been coming. They wandered about, but Moses was writing about it. So Moses would have said they were somewhere out in the east. They were out there somewhere in the east, because that would have been east of Israel, east of where Moses would have been writing this. And of course, this map is this global map, and it's not quite the best map to be talking about directions, but hey, they were somewhere out in the east, and that's where this all happened. Keep in mind. So where they were journeying, they found the plain in the land of Shinar. So let me go ahead and pull out this land of Shinar map again. They dwelt there, and so they start making bricks. So here you can see them. They were already making stuff, mind you. Remember, if we go back to Genesis, where was it? Genesis 4, when we talk about Cain and Abel. I think it was Genesis 4. Let me go to Genesis 4. And Adam knew. So here we got this, and we start talking about Cain's line. And if we talk about Cain's line, Jabal, he was the father of such that handled the harp and organ. And there was Tubal Game, he's the instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. So you could see they were already having to make stuff before the flood. Coming around to verse 11, let me go ahead and find these pictures, and I'll move into the land of Shinar. I think you can still see my screen, so that's good. Babel, let's see, Nimrod's kingdom, Shinar. So here is ultimately, look, you can even see Mount Ararat right up here. So they would have kind of been coming down south and to the east, sort of, and they would have all been off to the east. So you could see the land of Shinar, and here's Babylon. That's where ultimately Babel would have probably been too. Babel was kind of around that area. So let's see. And so he begat, let's see. We're up in 11. So this is, they're making brick. And slime, so slime, I think other translations say that that's tar or something. But basically they were making brick and stone, and they were using mortar to stick them together. They were going through some heavy construction is what we're basically hearing about. They're going through some construction, and they say, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name. So this would have been Nimrod in them. All right, so this would have been Nimrod. It wasn't just, it would have been Nimrod that found this Shinar. Nimrod was a mighty hunter. We heard about Nimrod in chapter 10. So that's why Nimrod and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So at this point, they're kind of the whole family, mind you, not just Ham's side, but it would have also probably been Shem, because we do hear about Abram coming out of the Chaldees as well. So Abram was coming from down here. So that means pretty much the whole family would have been spreading all this area right here. So this is the area that Noah's people, the survivors of Noah, would have started spreading out from right here. But we do also hear that one of his sons made it all the way out to the east. I mean, all the way out to the west, out there by England and everything, Spain, out where Tarshish was. So they were making their way out there too. Maybe they came down, or maybe some people went off to the west. Maybe some came south. We're not really sure, but they were down here. At least some of the people were. And they were more than likely Nimrod and Nimrod's group of people. And Nimrod would have probably been the king. Nimrod would have been showing himself to be one of the strongest people. He would have been becoming a giant. He would have been getting big. He would have been hunting. He would have been building. It was a busy time is what was going on. So obviously they built this tower, and it was getting big enough that God came down to see the city and the tower. And that's where he decides, you know what? This is just more of them doing bad things. God clearly wanted them to, it looks like he wanted them to be scattered. He wanted to scatter them. He wanted them to be going all over the world, not just sticking around in the cities. And we do come across, like, later on, there's I want to maybe go ahead and take a look. Bible verse, woe to those who build their homes in squares. Something like that. Let me see what I can. Woe to those. Isaiah 5:8. Yeah, Isaiah 5:8. And here's the. Let's go straight to the KJV, King James. Woe unto them that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. So let's see. What sorrow for you, buy up house after house and field after field, until everyone is evicted, and you live alone in the land. Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field till no space is left, and you live alone in the. So I mean, this is kind of what they were doing. They were adding house to house and joining field to field. That's basically what a city is. Don't think anything else. That is what a city is. A city is house to house. So I don't really like this. This doesn't seem like the greatest translation. Woe to what sorrow who buy up house after house and field after field until everyone is evicted and you live alone in the land. That doesn't necessarily seem to be the best translation. To me, it looks like what they're doing is they're making cities, and they're living alone in the midst of the land. Not just one person, but the people that are living there. And that's exactly what these guys are doing. God wanted them to scatter and to be all over the place. There's plenty of room, and I did mention that. Actually, I think I mentioned that in my other channel when I was talking about the Marvel superheroes, and I was talking about, if you don't know, and I'll make this as kind of a side mention, and I'll put a link to that video, but Stan Lee, the Marvel guy, the guy from Marvel Comics, he died just the other day. And I'll post that video here. I'll link that video here. But like basically, what was I kind of getting into? They were making, I don't even know what I was getting into. They were basically making a city, these whole people, and they were supposed to be scattered. Oh yeah, basically what I was getting at is this world is big enough for everybody. There's this idea, there's a concept that there's not enough to go around, or that we're overpopulated and there's not enough. That's just a lie. Overpopulation is a myth. Uh, Everybody in the world, there's plenty of room all over this earth for everybody in this world to live. But the problem is just like what we've done here. We've put house to house. We've built house by house and field. We've put them next to each other. That's exactly what Isaiah 5:8 tells us not to do. Woe to us that join house to house, that lay field to field. There is no, until there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. And that's what we've already done. And so here God says, what does God say? In mine ears, said the Lord of hosts, of a truth many houses shall be desolate, even great and fair, without inhabitant. So that's what's going to end up happening is, and God is already telling them, you should not be doing what you're doing. You're making a city. You're putting house by house, and you're laying field by field, and you're going to be alone in the land if you do what you're doing. So that's why God comes and scatters them. And he's telling them, just like what I'm saying, there's no reason for you to say, for example, like what Stan Lee and this latest installment of the Avengers, it's called the Infinity War or something, the Infinity War of the Infinity Stones. But basically, that's the concept where the bad guy, whose name is, I want to say his name is Thanos. Once again, another false god, as I mentioned in that video with Stan Lee. He's just a false god, and he thinks that the problem is there's too many people and not enough to go around, is what he's basically. And he's basically like, they make him, not only is he the villain, but he's also a good guy. If you look at one way, he's a good guy. And so they make this guy a good guy, and ultimately what he's doing is he's concocted a plan, and his plan is to kill half of the civilization. Half of everybody that's living, he says, needs to die. He doesn't care who it is. He just says half of the people gotta go. I don't care who. Doesn't necessarily mean good or bad people. Just 50% of the population has gotta die. That was Thanos' thought, and at the end of this Avengers movie, the Infinity War, that's exactly what happens. He succeeds in killing half the universe. Half the people die, and he rests, and he's thinking he's a great guy. It's the end of that first movie. What a great guy. He solved the problem. Now the world and the universe will be able to continue forward, and everybody's going to have all that they need. That was their concept, and that's a concept that is still in existence today. People really believe in that nonsense. People really believe that there's overpopulation. People really believe that the earth cannot sustain humans. They're really that silly. They're really that foolish to believe that the earth is not enough. And God is right here. This is the story of Babel. The Tower of Babel is God saying, there's plenty of room. You don't need to be trying to go into space. And that's the Tower of Babel. That's chapter 11. That's the beginning part. You don't need to go to space. You got plenty enough. Go ahead and scatter across the earth. And in order to facilitate this, God actually makes many different languages. So that way there's only so many people that stick with each other after that. After that, people are talking different languages, and they were probably not hanging out with the people that no longer spoke their language. Now they're like, hey, you don't even speak my language. I'm not going to hang out with you guys. But these guys speak my language, and there's only a few of us. We're going to go do our thing. And that's what God was facilitating, the spread. He was facilitating this spread because later on we are informed that God does not like people building cities. And I know there's a lot of cities to this day. All over this world, there are city after city where people join house to house and they join field to field. And really, that's what Isaiah is saying. Woe to us for doing such a thing. God's going to destroy the cities. But that's what that's all about. A lot of people, again, take this out of context, call God a bad God for doing this. Doesn't make any sense. People don't understand it, but it makes perfect sense. I don't understand why people are confused about this story and why it was vital that he did that. He needed to spread them. There's no reason why everybody should have just been hanging out in the land of Shinar. This world would not have been good if everybody just lived in the land of Shinar. There was so much more earth to go around. And then, so after he scatters them, that's verse 9. By verse 9, the Tower of Babel is basically, the story is over. The people have been scattered. I'm sure Nimrod probably wasn't too happy about it, but Nimrod was just starting his kingdom, so I'm sure he had a lot of other things to do. But it jumps in, starting in verse 10 of chapter 11, we get into the generations of Shem. Now, this is kind of confusing. I mean, this is kind of not confusing, but this is interesting. Hold on. This story is interesting because you'll start noticing, look, Shem, and I'm not going to really necessarily get into all these names. What I'll do instead, excuse me, I'm hiccuping over here. I'll pull up this picture again. It's the genealogy. So we do see Shem's, they're called the Semitic people. We got Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, Aram. And then through Arphaxad, we got Selah and Aber. And then we got Peleg, and we get all the way down to Abram. We got this guy, Joktan, and we've got Uz. We got all these people, and I think these are all named here. If they're not named here, they were named back in Genesis 10. You see Ru over here. Serug, all these names are names that are in here. Rug and Serug, right here, right? Actually, yeah, Ru, Serug, Nahor, Terah, all these names. But what's going on here with something special, or what's interesting, is their age. So Noah, we know, lived until 950 years old. Noah lived till 950 years old, right? Shem, his son, only lived to 600 years old or so. So after the flood, so he had Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. He was 100 years old, so he was 102 when he had this kid, and then he lived another 500 years. So he basically lived to 602 years old, right? But then Arphaxad was 35 years old, and he had this kid. And then he only lived to be 403 years after that. So he lived to be 400. And let's see, 400. So 35 plus 400, so 438 years old. So look, if you realize that, it looks like Arphaxad died before Shem. Yeah, because Shem, so after Arphaxad 2 years, he lived 500 more years. So Shem lived 500 years after he had Arphaxad. Well, Arphaxad only lived 35 plus 403. So he only lived to be 438 years old. So he died before Shem died. Arphaxad died before Shem. So keep that in mind. Shem saw his children die. Shem, let's see, who's his children? Arphaxad, and let's see what happens. Let's go down this line. So Arphaxad had this guy, Selah, and Arphaxad lived 403 years, so he died before Shem died. Now, let's see. Now, let's move on down the timeline. So Selah was, Selah lived 30 years and begat Aber, and he lived 403 years. So Selah lived to be 433 years old, right? So he's 433 years old, but he comes 35 years after, so he's 37 years after the flood, but 35 years after Arphaxad was born. So Shem has Arphaxad, and 35 years later, here comes this guy Salah, but then Salah lives only for 403 years after that. So 35 years and 400. So basically, it's sounding like, let's see, Arphaxad, Selah died before, it says Salah died before Shem did too. And so then that means Eber, now Eber is 30 plus 35 plus 30, so Eber is 70 or 65 years after, basically 67 years after the flood. And then Salah lived for 403 years after that. So 60, he's 67. Basically, this is 67 years later. And then 403. So he only lived to 433, but this is 468, basically 600 or 467 years after the flood or something like that. But Shem lived 500 years after the flood. You get what I'm saying? He begat 500 years he lived after Arphaxad, and these guys didn't even make it 500 years after Arphaxad. They're only making it 478 years after Arphaxad or so. 407. And Eber lived 30 years and begat Peleg. So we got 35 from Arphaxad to Selah, 30 from our until this guy had his son. So we're talking about 35 plus 30 years. That's 65. And then Eber was basically so then Eber was, let's see, 34 years old when he had Peleg, and then he only lived 430 years. So this is 30 plus 35 plus 34, right? 30 plus 35, that's 65 plus 34, that's 99 years. And then he lived 430 years. So this guy, Eber, lived a little bit after Shem. So Eber lived after Shem. So Shem died right around Eber. But Peleg over here lived 30 years. And then he only lived 209 years. So that means this guy, Eber, had his son, Peleg. And Eber outlived Peleg. You see what I'm saying? And Peleg died quite a bit before Shem died. Peleg only lived basically 300 years or so after the flood, for 300 years after the flood, and Shem lived 500 years after the flood, right? 502 years after the flood. And so Ru died, and so that means if you go down the line, it very well could be that Abram died before Shem died. I'd have to take a look at the numbers, but it very well looks like Abram himself, even though we go down all these lines, most of these guys or some of these guys did not live as long as Shem lived. So Shem very well outlived a lot of these guys. Not all of them, it looks like. It looks like Eber lived longer. But then it looks like everybody underneath Eber, down Eber's line, at Peleg, Ru, they only lived 200, 100, and Nahor lived 200 also, and Abram only died at 170 something years old or something like that. So he didn't even get to 200 years old. Basically, it looks like almost everybody here died before Shem died, with the exception of at least Aber, but Aber lived even longer than Abram. So it looks like Abram died before Aber did. So it's quite a thing here that they were living so long before the flood that when it comes to this story is important right here after the because they started living shorter and shorter lives, and it looks like even Shem himself lived longer than most of his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren themselves. And same thing with Aber. And I think Aber is ultimately the person that named the town of that Hebrew. And then, Aber, I think, is a little bit short of Heber or something. And then ultimately, that's where, let's see, Abram comes from that town. So when we see this town, Hebron, that's why they call him a Hebrew. But that could have very well been the town that maybe this guy Aber set up. Not necessarily that that's the case, Aber, but this guy also lived for quite a while, and this guy looks like he outlived. He was probably the only guy that it seems to have that seems to have outlived Shem, and he didn't do it by very much. And he didn't outlive Shem in age. He simply died after Shem died. That seems to be, and I'd have to do the numbers, and I guess I'll have to do that someday. But just from my little calculations as it is, And from looking at the numbers, it definitely looks that Shem outlived a lot of these guys. It looks like he may have even outlived Abram. He very well might have lived. Not necessarily, but he got close because, let's see, Arphaxad 35 to Salah, that's 35. From Salah to Eber, that's 30. So 30, that's 65 years. From Salah, from Eber was another 34. So we're at 99 years, right? So at 99. And Peleg lived 30, so 30 years. So Peleg, after 30 years, we're talking about 99, 129 years. And then after Ru lived 30, so 129 plus 32 years, 129 plus 32, that's 159, 161. And Serug was 130 years old, so Serug, so 161. So we're talking about 191 years later before Nahor was born. 191. And then Nahor was, okay, so here he is, 91, 191 plus, he was 90, he was 29, so 191 plus 29, 191 plus 29, that's 101, 111, so what, 120, 120, or 220 before Terah, and then 220, Terah was 70, so that's 290 before Abram. So Abram comes about 290 years after Arphaxad was born. So Shem was still alive, 290 years, and Shem didn't even live 200 years. That would have been 490 years if he did, and Shem lived 500 years after Arphaxad was born. So you see that it does look like Abram actually died before Shem died. So I find that that's based off of these numbers. It looks like Abram died about 50 years, maybe 50 years before Shem died. So that's absolutely incredible, and that stems from Genesis. I want to say Genesis 6. Genesis 6. 3. Genesis 6:3. My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. And that's what we're seeing in Genesis 11. It's playing out. I mean, they're dying younger and younger and younger, and Abram dies about 170 something years old. I don't think he makes it to 180. But eventually they all start dying under 120 years. I think Abram was the last person that died pretty old like that. I don't think, but I'd have to take a look that any of his children, I don't think Jacob or going into Joseph, I don't think any of those guys lived into their hundreds or very much past 120 if they did, or around 120. I don't really know. I think Moses is the last person that lives to 120 years old or something. I think Moses goes 40 years and then 40 years, and I think 40 years in the desert before he dies. So I think he's 80 years old when he takes him out, and I think he spends 40 years in the desert. So I think Moses dies at about 120 years old. But that's pretty much it. This is the last of the great lines, the people that lived that long. And you'll notice that it is kind of interesting that ultimately some of these guys, like even Abram, seem to not they didn't live as long as Shem did. And so that means Shem got to see them die. And it's pretty sad because they were living very, very long years, very old ages. And then after the flood, it probably also, it had to hurt. And I'm sure it had to hurt for Shem. To watch all these people grow and all these great men and just die. They're just dying. He couldn't keep them alive, and then he eventually died as well. But not probably before seeing a bunch of his own children die and a bunch of his own family die. They just weren't living very long. Just weren't living that long at all. And so that's chapter 11. It was the Tower of Babel. It was Shem's historic or genealogy. and the fact that people just weren't living long, and that people were now speaking different languages. And basically, you could see it kind of being like a war against God, because God said he wouldn't strive with men for more than 100 years, 20 years. So that means every man had basically uh, gone to war with God, and God was at war with them, and he was dealing with them. He messed with our languages, he messed with our lifeline. He's a true king, a true God. He was destroying his enemies. He was conquering us. We were conquered, we are conquered. And ultimately I'm just a captive. I'm captivated by Jesus Christ. I'm a captive of his kingdom. So I'm going to go ahead and end this here. I'll go ahead and say, anybody who's watching, God bless you, whoever's watching, and I pray that we all bless Jesus Christ, and may Jesus Christ bless all of us. Amen.